Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Rios from Wahl+Case, marketing specialist and consultant. I'm here today with Joshua Grant, who is the Director of Analytics and Innovative Solutions at Dentsu. Joshua, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Yeah, so today I kind of want to go through your introduction and then your career, but then also maybe some high-level trends in ad tech.
Sure.
Awesome. Yeah, and so to get things started, I was curious to know if there was like a through line of marketing in your career, like things that you've been maybe attracted to or things that you found exciting.
That's an interesting question. I mean, for me, I got into marketing by chance. It wasn't something that I studied or even really knew existed as a job. So when actually through my sister, she asked me if I'd be interested in working at an advertising or marketing firm. I didn't have any idea what I'd be doing. And then sort of fell into it and started to really like it. I think I've had kind of a very, I would say, traditional sort of journey through marketing, like starting very much with sort of ad ops and spending days in front of Excel documents. To then sort of progressively moving into, I think for me, sort of strategy is where I sort of found my footing, which was, the idea of being able to help brands understand how they should deliver their message, whether that's from a media standpoint or looking at insights or being able to provide information on sort of how consumers are changing or behaving, and sort of helping the brand sort of sit down and sort of ideate through what's going to be the best solution to deliver their message. I think that's the part of it I really enjoy. The interesting thing is that sort of touches all of the other elements, right? Because it tends to be kind of this sort of, you start with a strategy and then everything else becomes really tactical. And so I think as I sort of wanted to have more, I think for me, I wanted to have more say in sort of the overall projects that I was working on and have more sort of responsibility and partnerships with the clients that I was working with, as opposed to just being siloed in like, you're just social, and don't worry about whatever else is going on. So I think that sort of pushed through strategy, and that's kind of been the main sort of through line of my career until sort of data showed up at my doorstep. And then it's been all about data since then.
The rest is history.
The rest is history. I love data. It's great. So yeah, I mean, with data, I think that started through really wanting to understand programmatic. And I think everyone in the industry, once programmatic really started to take off, was very fascinated by it, very confused by it. Trying to understand would we all still have jobs, and what that sort of looked like. And I think increasingly data has become sort of the through line for how you execute programmatic really well. And I think that every marketer in some way has to be somewhat data savvy. I don't think you need to be a data analyst, but you need to be able to connect analysis and information that you see to really make, as people say, data-driven decisions. And so I think more and more we're seeing that in terms of how to measure the effectiveness of your marketing, how to measure the effectiveness of even just sort of what your team is doing and executing for you, from a budget standpoint, from a performance standpoint. So I think data is sort of, I think we've always kind of said, the data guys are like the uncool guys in the agency that like sit in the back, but it's actually those guys who are really helping bring in business for, the strategists and the creatives and, the social media marketers, et cetera. So I think data was just a natural progression, as I think it will be for everyone. And so I've really just sort of tried to get into it more, understand it more. And it's constantly changing, so it keeps you pretty on your toes.
Nice. So would you say like data has been the central kind of skill that you've been known for or that you've developed the most?
I would say so. I mean, for me, data became, I think, relevant to my work when it became relevant to everyone's work, which is, 5-6 years ago, when, again, programmatic blew up, and it was about, how are you going to target, which data are you going to use to target your audiences, how can you be more efficient, that kind of, target the right person at the right time and the right place kind of thing, right, which is fundamentally built on data. And so I think it became something that I became known for as I myself attempted to sort of stay ahead of what was going on in the industry. For me, I would love to be known as like a creative, but I'm not at all. But I think it's being able to, I think my skill is being able to take something that could be complex as data and simplify it into actionable insights and help create a strategy and tactic around that. I think that's fundamentally what I would like to be known for. My clients can say if I'm good at it or not, but that's what I try to focus on now is sort of putting myself in sort of the from the viewpoint of the client and saying, I know that you could throw at me 1,000 Excel spreadsheets and have algorithms that do X, Y, and Z, but what do I do with that? How do I make sense of that? And I think that's what I'm becoming known for, and also the part of it that I enjoy.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. I think that sounds valuable.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I'm still employed,
Yeah.
so I hope it's still valuable. But I think it's I think that I used to say this a lot, but I think that, and probably this is somewhat of a controversial statement, but I think that digital media sometimes in the early stages, I think in many ways was designed to be complex, or the idea was the more complex it sounds, the more likely my client will let me do it, right? Because there was a point where, as sort of digital media experts and agencies or consultants, we knew more than the client when all of this technology was emerging, and we're like DSPs and SSPs and do all of this and whatever and CRMs and the client's like, what are you talking about? Like, okay, just do it, And I think, interestingly enough, the clients have started to get more savvy. You see things like in-housing happening, where brands are bringing in talent, and so I think that idea of kind of outsmarting the client no longer exists. And so they're asking for, okay, again, this is great that you have mountains of data for me to go through. What am I supposed to do with this? What's the takeaway? And I hope that continues to be why I stay employed.
Yeah, exactly. That's where that value add is actually.
Exactly.
I totally agree. Nice. And so taking a step back, you've worked all over the globe, literally.
Yeah.
And so maybe just go through if we could just go through some of the differences between like working in Paris and working in Tokyo and working in Chicago.
That was never intentional, actually. I started my first marketing role in Texas, in Dallas. I've always been within the same group of agencies, interestingly enough. And I think one of the things that appealed to me was I felt that I always tried to anticipate where I would be the most valuable or where my expertise could be the best utilized. And I also wanted to experience living in other countries and other parts of the world, and I thought work is the best way to do that. It was never intentional. It was just like I would see, working as part of an agency group, one of the big holding companies, there's agencies all over the world, and I would sort of look and see jobs that I thought were really interesting and go, oh, I could do that. And then sort of just ask. And you'd be surprised how if you just ask for some things, like sometimes you get them, right?
I totally
And so I was
understand.
working in Dallas and I was like, can I go to Paris and work? And they're like, okay, what are you gonna do? It obviously, it helped that I spoke the language at the time, and I was able to sort of navigate France really well. But I have always just seen opportunities as kind of borderless, and obviously there are places that are better than others to sort of do advertising, but that was kind of always my approach. It was about the job and the role and the opportunity that would be there, and then I would just go and do it. I think what I've learned in terms of the different markets is so interesting. I mean, you know, you have to, whenever you work in different markets, you always have to you have to balance this, especially if you're coming from America. You always kind of have to balance this sort of American sort of viewpoint. Obviously, it's the number one industry. I mean, it's the number one market for advertising, right? So things tend to happen there a lot faster most of the time. And so you have to really balance being someone who arrives in another market as an American with some sense of expertise and knowledge of what's sort of coming, and balance that with like where the market that you're working in is, and try not to be this kind of egotistical American who's like, I know better, this is the way it should be done. And so that was always, I think, the initial challenge is like, how do you balance bringing the value that you know that you bring to the table while still trying to work within like the system that you're working in. And what I found is, you know, in America with marketing, in my experience, you know, it's always about doing things first. Like all of the clients want to be the first one to do it. They always want to test the technology first. There's ad tech startups popping up like every couple days, and sort of the ecosystem is just so big. When I went to, and I think the idea with selling things through in America is always like, you know, you can sell things through with like, this would be awesome if we did this. Like, it would be amazing. Like, this is the coolest tech ever. And like, that will work, right? And then I remember when I would go to France and try to sell in that same way, an idea or concept, it was like, no, show me the actual information. I need to see the numbers. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Numbers? Like, it's cool. And so it was just more of a sort of numbers-based approach, I felt like. And then Japan, I think, is that even more exponentially, which is, you know, not being sold through on things being cool and awesome, but really trying to understand sort of end-to-end how things work, and really understand not only the positives of trying or testing or doing this particular solution, but what are the negatives? What are the potential negative impact that this could have on my business, et cetera, et cetera. And so you really have to think it through. And I remember being very frustrated coming here and like having to do a number of different exercises to prove a point. Like, okay, now do it with like a $10,000 budget. Now do it with $1 million budget, you know? Yeah. And you're just like, what? It's cool. You know, let's just do it. But I think that's really helped me, is kind of going to each of those markets and trying to understand. And I would say the last part of this is, I think you kind of have to have a very global point of view now. I mean, most of the brands I work for are present in many markets. I think also with sort of globalization and social media and everything, I think you have to really think about what's going on everywhere, and try to sort of, I think that's what sets you apart, like having a bit of a global mindset and being able to understand that, you know, whether that's creative, like this will work in this market but won't work in that one, or we should say this or we should say that, or, you know, in Japan, Yahoo's bigger than Google, that kind of thing that you just have to sort of understand. So, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. I think that, I think that having that global mindset is like a crux almost. Like it's so necessary moving forward, and like anything, like even just being on top of like even like with TikTok and like America potentially
for
winning,
sure,
and there's like
for
so
sure,
much, like,
yeah. I mean, it's you know, people made fun of me when I got on TikTok. I mean, I don't make any videos on TikTok. I mean, I have.
We can link it.
I have just to see how it works, but. You know, a lot of my friends joked with me, like, why are you on TikTok? You're like 35 years old, that's for kids. And it's like, yeah, but this is what the industry has been. I mean, how many times has TikTok been mentioned in the news in the last 6 months? And the idea that if a client were to come to me and say, we're interested in TikTok advertising, or we're interested in TikTok, what do you know?
Exactly.
I mean, I can't give an answer like, well, I'm 35, so I don't know anything about TikTok. You know what I mean? It's like, so yeah, it's not for kids. Yeah, I think it's for kids, and I don't think you should be on it. But I think that I think it's that again to me is a part of the global mindset, right? It's you know, it's being educated about what's going on in the industry. It's also wanting to participate in what is going on. You know, I'm not like when it comes to social media and stuff, I don't post so often, but I'm aware of what's being discussed and aware of you know, things that are trending on Twitter, and even a bit of, you know, even though it's always not my interest, a bit of pop culture. Like, you have to kind of know what's going on. What are people talking about? You know, I mean, and I think it's a part of that global mindset, especially I think now where one of the big things that you've seen change in marketing in recent years is marketing, a brand marketing their values and like what they stand for and what they believe in. And the idea that it's so quick to find information about, you know, who a brand supports. I mean, there was, you know, scandals not too long ago when you found out certain brands were, you know, supporting Trump, et cetera. So it's, and you have to know those things. And so I think as we move toward this kind of people caring less about, of course they care about the product and what's being created, but it's more about what does me using this brand say about me and what I stand for and what I believe in. And if you're unaware of what's going on in the world, I don't know how you could do your job effectively. So I think that's kind of the global mindset, but also just being really aware of what's going on, I think.
That was great. And so kind of following in that thought of innovation, I wanted to talk a little bit about Cheq.
Okay.
So yeah, you for a time you were the managing director of JPAC for Cheq, which is a pretty new solution. Like not a lot of proven track record in in Japan. So how was that? Maybe talk a little bit about. I guess maybe what it is first. I think maybe we know what it is, and I don't know if the audience.
So Cheq is a cybersecurity company that specifically creates products designed to protect advertisers from ad fraud. There's brand safety elements as well, but primarily ad fraud, which is one of the largest growing criminal entities, right? Is digital ad fraud. So interestingly enough, I had always been in agencies, and I actually came across Cheq because of work that I was doing at Dentsu. Dentsu had become very interested in Cheq and the capabilities that they had because it was kind of the first ad verification type of solution that really focused on cybersecurity and being built by people who understood. I mean, the whole thing with Cheq was that the tools itself were built by people who understood like national security and hacking and were able to kind of really get inside the weeds of how digital ad fraud was working. And I was very much intrigued by the company. And also I really wanted to experience what it was like to work at a startup, primarily because I think sometimes when you're in an agency, you tend to get siloed and you really don't understand how the rest of the business works. Well, how does the agency make money? What do our contracts look like? How do we decide, you know, team allocations? What are our margins, et cetera? Because you're so focused on like, you just do programmatic or you just do social. And so what appealed to me about Cheq was A, the technology I found really interesting, and then B, the idea to get in the very early stages of a startup and watch organically how that happened. How do you go from an idea to a product to a company, right? And all of the steps in between. And so that's what was sort of really exciting about working at Cheq was, you know, when Cheq started, we were, you know, 2 offices, and now there are 5 globally. And sort of really sitting down with like the CEOs and just sort of saying, okay, what are we going to do with this product? What are we going to call this product? You know, and sort of really having a say in all of that. And it was really, I think my biz dev skills grew a lot. I think the strategy part that I think has always been fundamental in my career, that was, it allowed me to do that at a more macro level. Because I think also when you're building a startup, you're making decisions that really will affect the future of the company, not just in the immediate, but I'm sure you've ever worked at a company where they have some practice and you're like, why is this the practice? Why is this the rule? Somebody made that for you back whenever the company was starting, right? And so that was what was really interesting, was I was like, oh, I could be the guy who makes the rule, like the rule that everyone hates 10 years from now. Like, who came up with this rule? Joshua did. So yeah, and so I did that for a little over a year and a half, and I became very interested in sort of going back to an agency and taking those skills to what I'm doing at the agency.
Nice.
Yeah,
that was a perfect segue into.
it was a perfect setup. I handed it over. It's okay.
Hitting it back to you. Yeah, and so at Dentsu, what are maybe some of the big innovations that you guys are working on now, or things that you're excited about, going back?
I mean, I think the biggest thing, right, is what was the idea of me going back to Dentsu before COVID, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I had in my mind when I was thinking about what it would look like to go back to an agency, and then COVID hits and everything sort of goes into the air. And I think prior to COVID, you had people discussing that the agency model is dead. Like, agencies are dead, and then COVID hit and they were like, agencies are really dead. Like, they're dead. So I think, what you have happening within Dentsu that I think is happening within any agency right now is sort of deciding on how to help your clients understand the transitions that are about to take place, whether that be purely from how consumers behave to the upcoming sort of data transitions that are going to happen, whether that's on the privacy side or data collection in general, what that's going to look like for creative, what is the landscape going to look like across social media or OTT, et cetera. So I think that, the core function I see it as the agencies now is really sort of hand-holding and partnering with clients more than trying to be just sort of a service conduit, right? And sort of helping them sort of navigate the changing environment that we all see. And I think in particular, that really is what I call, or what I'm trying to do within Dentsu, which is like future-proof the clients, right? So try to anticipate what's coming, whether that's what happens when cookies disappear, or IDFA disappears, or TikTok gets banned, or whatever. Like, what are you gonna do? And so it's been a lot of, trying to identify first-party data solutions and CRM building and helping them sort of navigate and prepare for that. I think also, my title has innovation in it, and I think that's such a tough word because it means so much for so many different types of people. How I see innovation at my role in Dentsu is trying to identify where there are gaps in services that we can offer or solutions that we can offer to clients and fill those gaps as quickly as possible and as seamlessly as possible to everything else that Dentsu is executing. I see my kind of innovation role as being less about kicking the door down and stepping in and saying, I'm here, to more sort of this harmonious type solution where I'm trying to pull a few of the pieces together and then sort of patchworking some gaps there. So with Dentsu, obviously, as with any agency, we're focusing a lot on first-party data and CRMs. We're focusing a lot on creative and content because I think that's going to be key also, is like, how do you get through all of the noise? How do you have yourself heard? And really focusing on, I think, eliminating wastage, right? I think this is one of the things that a lot of the clients are asking for across, the industry. I think you've seen this big shakeup of kind of where is my money going? where has my money been going? And so eliminating wastage, and I think the ways that we do that is really focused on analytics and and being able to make very quick data-driven decisions, and be able to say, okay, here are the area, whether that's sort of an attribution, et cetera, but if we have to streamline the model now, right, which is what most clients are asking for, if we have to streamline the model now, I want to have the best tools to help you decide where we should cut and where we should spend. I don't believe, I'm against the idea that because it's COVID that, you know, that you should cut budgets massively. I don't think that's the case. I think you just have to sort of reorganize budgets and reorganize also priorities. For example, if you're not doing e-commerce, you should be. And if you're not doing e-commerce, you should be. And so what does that look like? I mean, that's more than just putting up a website, you know, that's figuring out how to build a proper e-commerce solution that's going to, you know, deliver on the results. I was actually listening to a podcast called The Business of Fashion, and they were talking about, in one of the episodes, there was a study that shows that actually in situations of trauma or crisis, as we're experiencing now with the pandemic, people actually tend to spend more. Yeah. Because you feel like, part of it is because money, sort of material things bring comfort and stability. So it's like, oh, if I have everything around me the way I want it to be, then things aren't so bad. And so I think that, you know, how does that go into marketing? Well, we need to prepare for consumers to behave and spend in that way. So it's connecting, you know, first, what does the company stand for? What are your values? What are you trying to communicate? Why should the consumer choose you over the hundreds of other options that they might have? And then once they do that, for me, you know, people are, we've been trained to buy and we've been trained to transact. So for me, it's the next step is how, and what I tell the clients is like, what is the easiest way for someone, a consumer, to transact with your brand? And what are the hurdles that you have to limit that transaction, and how can we make that process faster? And so I think those sorts of things, so it's each of these steps that I try to put together, that sort of, and that's what Dentsu is focusing on, is you know, from a creative and content standpoint, what do we do in terms of data, making sure that you're prepared for all of the changes that come with data, and then how do you just make it easier for people to buy your products? Because at the end of the day, that's what they care about. So it's, yeah.
Exactly. That's what really matters.
Yeah, it's what really matters. I mean, you're there to, I mean, they want to sell products, and even more so now. And I think, you know, if you've got a cumbersome, if you don't have e-commerce, you know, why? If your e-commerce site is cumbersome, why? If you're, you know, blasting impressions to everyone and anyone, why? And so it's sort of really sort of thinking about those things again, and sort of having a very sort of, you know, I think that what's been really interesting about marketing after COVID is it's almost kind of burst a bubble of, we need this solution and this partner, and we need to work with like 1,500 agencies, and you know, and it's like, okay, now it's all of, you know, let's streamline it. Let's bring it back to the core of what it is. Who are you? What are you selling? And how can I make it easy for you to sell it? And I think that's what we focus on at Dentsu. And that's through tools and partnerships and developing new technology and all of that.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great. That's amazing. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a trend that you had touched on, about in-housing, and how, like, from my perspective, it seems like there's a limit to what in-housing can even do. Like, I feel like, and maybe brands going into that initially think like, oh, we just need a guy who knows what a DSP is, you know what I mean, or knows how to operate a DSP. But like, in reality, like, there's so much more. Like, even the things you're talking about now, with like that strategy element, like, you're not going to get that from that one ad ops guy and your CMO or something.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in-housing is, first of all, not every brand can afford to in-house properly. I think there is a short list of brands that can do it really, really well and have the financial capacity and resources to do that, because primarily you need to pay for the talent. Apart from building the proper infrastructures that you want to build, but then you need talent to sort of execute that. And I think that's one of the things that comes from the agency is that additional skill set and the talent and the know-how. I also think that, when you talk about in-housing, a lot of that comes from, I think, a feeling of a lack of transparency from agencies previously, right? The idea that I think it's cheaper if I bring this internally, right? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So I think that the whole kind of COVID situation has revealed, opened a wound that I think existed between the advertiser and the agency, or really the advertiser and the marketing industry as a whole. And I think we're in a really unique position to kind of all come to the table and sort of discuss the realities of what is really relevant and what's important, and then what has just been kind of fluff that we've been able to sort of stuff into the solutions that we're offering. And so I think, for me, in-housing is something that is a result of wanting to control and wanting to have say and wanting to be able to see how your dollars are being spent. And so I think that as agencies start to streamline and I think really focus on sort of the core elements, data, analytics, ROI, etc., I think that you'll see, maybe, I would hope, for the sake of the agencies, that less brands would be more inclined to do that. Because also, you see the rise of consultancy. So even when companies want to in-house, they will then sort of go to a consultant and say, help us figure this out. And why can't that be the agency, for example, right? So I think it's about changing the model. I think it's about sort of agencies focusing on the types of information that they're providing. I think you see a lot of agencies bringing in sort of internal consultancies and solutions. But yeah, I think it's, agencies are going to have to change the model, and we're going to have to be able to do more than one or two services. You want to say to an advertiser, bring me your marketing needs and we can fill them from A to Z. And I see that happening within Dentsu. Dentsu is also incredibly unique in their power and capability. And it's one of the things that excited me about coming back there, because we have all of that, right? So now it's just sort of getting that, packaging and that, going to clients and saying, hey, this is what you need. Here is how we're going to help you. Not just with your immediate, I have a new product, I want to launch it next month campaign, but what's your sort of overall plan, and how can we sort of contribute to the growth of your brand through creative, through data, through insights, through analytics, etc. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And so now I want to take maybe a broad look at Japan. And so you were mostly in Japan for the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's like 2.5 years off and on. I kept leaving and coming back. I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. So it's been about so I was at Dentsu for 2 years, almost 2 years, and then I went to Cheq, and I went back to Europe for a year, and then I came back to Japan this past January, just before COVID, luckily. So I've been kind of, and I was, even when I was working with Cheq, Japan was a priority market for us, so I was always kind of working with a Japanese business. So Japan working in the market, I think it's so interesting, because I would like to say, and maybe people would disagree with me, so I'm sorry. I would say Japan is probably like 3 years behind what you see going on in the States and in Europe. I think that there's a lot of reasons for that that I won't get into, but I think that there has been kind of a sort of system that has worked here for a very long time, and there hasn't been a lot of push to accelerate because it's just kind of worked. And it is a unique market. It's a market where, Facebook isn't the dominant social media platform. It's a market where Yahoo still exists. It's a market where TV numbers are still incredibly high. So I don't think you can come into this market and go, this is what happens in America, let's like just replicate. And that's what's kind of been interesting. It's been, for me, it's been a lot of learning on how to navigate this system. And I think what I really see happening here is, or what I've learned and tried to really work on within Dentsu is sort of, again, this idea of harmony. I mean, that's what I keep kind of coming back to, is not saying TV's done or newspapers are done or, you know, Yahoo's done or whatever, and we should be doing this, but really, how can I amplify everything else that has been the crux of sort of Japanese marketing, right? I always say in Japan you don't have disruption, you have harmony, right? And the idea that I try to sort of say when it comes to digital specifically is, I'm never going to argue that TV is a horrible idea. If it works for your business and it's making sense and and it's delivering on your numbers, by all means, buy TV. What I feel that digital is here for in Japan, or my push has always been as an amplification tool. So your consumer is not always sitting in front of the television. How do you talk to them then, and what's the plan? Or some of the younger generation who will eventually go to start watching TV as they get older, they're not watching it now. So how do you talk to them? How do you build in brand loyalty with them early, so that as they become the TV watching consumer, or, you know, in the case of, the housewife or whatever, like, how do you build in that early loyalty? And so I've always seen digital here as amplification, where I know in other markets it's like digital first. You hear a lot of brands going digital first, or a lot of agencies like, we're digital first. I think it's okay. It's smart and it makes sense for the market. I think sometimes I feel like Japan's not there yet. Obviously, I think COVID has accelerated that massively. But that to me is the nuance of this market, is that you still have a lot of traditional media avenues that do really well for business, and you can't just say, hey, no TV, because you just want to do more digital. So that's what I found really unique about this market, is sort of, there's an educational element that comes into play here that I think we take for granted in other markets. Like, oh, well, everybody just knows this. Well, here, not everybody knows that. And so it's integrating the ideas and innovations that you want to do within their larger plan and sort of worldview, I think, is how I try to do it. But I mean, maybe that's not the case for other people. I think maybe kicking a door down works in some cases. But I've just found, for me, I mean, again, it's about the balance, right? I think that kicking the door down works in some situations. What I've really learned about working in Japan, particularly when innovation is in your title, is there are two things. You have to choose your battles. You can't win every innovation argument that you're going to have. You have to sort of prioritize, what is it worth to you? Do you really strongly believe in this particular innovation, and because of that, or this particular tactic, and because of that, you're not going to back down and you're going to push it through no matter what. And then there's some, like, I've been very sort of self-aware, and there's some innovations that I want to do because I just think they're cool. And it's like, and you sort of stop yourself and you go, okay, I get that that's cool, but it doesn't make sense for the client. And you sort of realize that there are battles that you can win and not win. I think that's sort of been the fundamental thing for me, is like choosing the battles, knowing when you can push. And also, I think for me, it's been about kind of bringing people along with me in my thought processes. I think sometimes, especially when you're kind of thinking through great ideas, you tend to kind of think of them on your own. And then when you explain them, you're kind of like, go with me, you get it, right? Like, follow me on this journey. And what I've really sort of learned here is the ability to better articulate why I believe a certain path or solution makes sense from the start to finish, and not assume that everyone's on board with my same train of thought. And I find that that really works for me, which is to say, kind of go with me on this thought process that I'm having. I would love for you to participate in this journey. And if you think that this train should divert at some point because it's going off a cliff, please let me know. And I find that that kind of collaborative thinking and sort of not wanting it to be my idea or like my plan, and sort of saying, here's what I'm thinking, let me explain my logic, and then let's figure out if this makes sense. I think that's really helped me here, more than probably kicking doors down, I think.
That's great. Yeah. And so kind of continuing on that, what are some of the things that you feel really excited about, or some cool tech or innovations that you're feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because in some ways it's really hard to say, because COVID has kind of just really, I mean, I hate to keep talking about COVID. It's always it's the topic of every conversation. But it's really kind of turned things on its head. I think, like I said, I think if you asked someone at the end of 2019 what were the marketing trends of 2020, it'd be completely different, set of things. I think ultimately what I would like to see, or what I think is going to happen, is, first of all, I think there's going to be more accountability when it comes to data, not only in terms of the data holders, the data providers, but also how we use and manipulate consumer data for advertising. I think there's going to be lots of discussions about that. And as those things happen, I think it's going to become, okay, then what does marketing look like when you can't just push a button and target this particular person because of all this data? How does that change? That's something that I think is really exciting, and I don't think anyone's really cracked it yet. So it's exciting to be a part of those discussions, but I think for sure that's going to change. I think also, you know, I sometimes wonder if we're going to go back to sort of the older days of advertising, when it's not going to be so personalized. It'll be personalized to a certain degree, right? I mean, it'll be relevant to your interest and whatnot, but it won't be like creepy personal. And that could be really interesting. And I read this interesting comment that it's like, people read what they enjoy, and sometimes people read advertising because they enjoy the advertising, or they read advertising because they're interested in whatever's being advertised. And I think that content and creative quality is just going to have to get exceptionally better. I think that, and it might have to be done without so much data if there are rules around that. So that's kind of an old way of doing things in some ways, right? Like, it's going to be about sort of what you know, and gut instinct and creative ideas that will be buttressed by data, of course. But I think the reliance of, like, I click a button and I have this data segment and then I launch a campaign. I think those days are finishing. What else am I excited about? I think I'm interested to see how brands navigate sustainability, how brands navigate, you know, the types of sort of social issues that we see time and again. We've seen brands do it really, really well, and we're like, wow, that's really impressive. But we've also seen brands have horrible cases of that. So I think that's going to be interesting, is how brands are going to navigate this, because, you know, especially I would say in America more so than Japan, where everything is incredibly politicized. I mean, it's like you could say one thing and then it's going to be like half the country is going to be like burn Nikes and the other country is not, right? So I'm really interested to see what happens there. So I would say, yeah, what we're going to do around data, and how brands will navigate more consumers wanting to know where brands stand in terms of social issues and values and sustainability. Yeah, I think those are going to be the two, and hopefully there's more TikTok in the future. No, just kidding. Yeah, but I think TikTok's great. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I would see. I think also, I guess I would say, like, as a last comment, like, I'm interested to see also how long the COVID effect is something that we refer to in terms of marketing and advertising. Like, you know, some people say like, this has changed us forever. Like, we will never be the same again. People will e-commerce shop forever. Nobody will leave their house. Also, I've been seeing studies where they're talking about how they might have to like teach people how to socialize again because like you've been in your. So I'm interested to see from just a sort of anthropological standpoint, but also from a marketing standpoint, like how long this COVID effect like is this really truly a change forever? So the way we market, the way consumers buy, the way we behave, is it for good? Or is this something that, you know, in 5 years we'll be like, oh, you remember that crazy COVID period where like we were having to do this and that? I think that'll be interesting to see.
That's great. Yeah. Awesome. One last question. If you have any, like maybe even words for me personally, like for marketers moving into the future, like things that they should be aware of or really focus on. We talked about content, like really heightening that.
Yeah.
Anything else that you would feel they need to know to be successful, kind of post-COVID effect, maybe?
Oh my God. Oh, this could come back to bite me. No, so I guess I think the first thing is start to really fall in love with data. I think it is going to provide you with so many opportunities. I even for myself, you know, I think everybody's like taking Coursera classes, right? So I've even signed up for sort of like data scientist courses so I can really truly understand the ins and outs of data. So I think fall in love with data because I think that anything that you do or anything that's going to set you apart and sort of make you an expert in your field is if you've got some data supporting your ideas. I used to get so frustrated, you know, when I would have sort of a really interesting kind of gut idea about something and then a client would be like, okay, show me the data to support that. And I'd be like, the what? Like, what do you want me to do? Aren't my feelings enough? So I think fall in love with data, I think is the key thing. I think also, for me, I would say figure out which part of the marketing world you really enjoy. Try to also think about what you think will be relevant and what you think will be of value a few years down the road. Obviously with technology and automation and all of those sorts of things, a lot of things are disappearing, a lot of roles are disappearing, we've seen that with COVID, a lot of agencies have been streamlining their teams and employees, and I think some of those jobs will come back. I think a lot of them will not. So really thinking about, you know, where do you think marketing will go, and then how do you think you fit? And I would say the last thing is probably also, if it's feasible, like be okay to go to another market and work. I find that you end up generating more skills. I mean, every job that I've gotten has been a direct result in some way of me working in another market. My job in France was because I wanted to go to France, but I had also lived there and had done some work there before. My job in Japan came as a result of working in France because a colleague that I worked with in France moved to Japan and introduced me to Dentsu. So I think, and it also sort of expands your knowledge of the industry, the players in the industry. So I would say, you know, if you're young and can do it, don't be afraid to go work in another market and understand sort of advertising and market in that particular place. So I guess that would be my 3, but you don't have to take my advice. I'm really bad at giving advice. But yeah, that's what I'd say.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Josh. Anything else, or Joshua, anything else you want to add, like closing thoughts?
No, I mean, thank you for having me. This has been really fun. I think the biggest thing for me is also, I know it sounds really nerdy, but I really love marketing. I think it's I try to convince anyone who doesn't know what they want to do in life to go into advertising and marketing. I think when you have the right fit, I think it's incredibly rewarding. I think it's fun. I think is incredibly dynamic. Every day you don't know what you're going to do that day, and that's really exciting. And I think I think for me also what I find really interesting about it is it really reflects also, and this is sort of very whatever, but it reflects also where a society is at a certain point. You know, if you look at commercials, if you look at advertising, if you look at, you know, media in general, I mean, you can get a sense of where we are culturally and who we are as a society, and the idea that you get to sort of play within that is really cool. So yeah, I would say go into marketing. That would be my last point.
That's great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.